Okay, then we're going to get started. So thanks for joining the webinar today. It's on improving quality and making the best use of social media analytics. I've got myself here, Charlotte Fatui, and I've got Phil Hearn, the Director of MRDC, with us today, who will be hosting the webinar. There'll be some questions and answers. You'll see a Q&A box, which you can do during the whole of the webinar, and at the end, we'll go through as many questions as we can get through. So what I'll do now is I'll pass over to Phil, who will start the webinar on the social listening.
Well, good morning to everybody in the western side of the world, and good afternoon for those joining us from the eastern side of the world for this webinar that we're holding today. The webinar today is going to break into sort of three sections, I guess. If I can just go through the agenda so that you know what to expect in this session. We're going to probably keep this to something like half an hour and then have 10-15 minutes at the end for any questions that you might want to ask, and we'll get through as many of them as we can, as Charlotte indicated. So the agenda we're going to go through today is that, first of all, I want to just go through what the process of gathering social media data for analysis is, and the processes you have to go through to get good quality work. So the first step is to just take you through that process of what we do and indeed what we offer as a company that's in this field. And I want to then spend a bit of time actually on that topic of data quality, because there are a lot of people in this space at the moment, a lot of companies offering these types of analytics. And I think it's important to understand the differences between what many companies offer and what we offer, and how we sort of fit more in the market research field, if you like, than perhaps a number of other companies that are offering this type of data. So I'm going to talk about data quality in a second section of this webinar. And then I'm going to take you on to our new SMART tools, which stands for Social Media Analytics and Research Tools, and show you how you can start to manage your own projects and analyze data yourself. So this is something that's quite new. It's fairly groundbreaking, I think, in the sense that I don't know any other companies that are doing this at the moment, or not to the depth that we're allowing. So I'm going to introduce you to that and take you through three examples of how you can actually handle projects yourselves, conduct your own analysis, and actually prepare projects yourselves, which means that the cost of actually handling a social media project now isn't just a case of sort of farming it out to us. We do all the work and give you the results. It means you can handle it yourself. You can customize it the way you want to. As a result of that, maybe get better results or more informative results, but particularly reducing the cost significantly from perhaps what was on offer just as recently as just a couple of months ago. And as Charlotte said, we'll end the session with a Q&A. Sometimes at these webinars, we do get a lot of questions, and we will do our best to get through as many of those as we can. And Charlotte will try and select the ones with the widest appeal, or what she thinks is the widest appeal. Any questions that we don't get to ask, because sometimes we get asked too many to fill in at the end here, we will come back to the person if they identify themselves, and come back with a separate email to explain that. Everything you see in this webinar today will be available for download. That includes the PowerPoint, the things that I'm demonstrating to you, and actually the recording of this video itself. So that's the agenda for today. So let's sort of press on and look at, first of all, what the process of handling these sorts of social media analytics projects are. And the first thing that in the sort of process, I guess, is fairly obvious in the sense that we have to harvest social media data. So we're only allowed to use data that's in the public domain. So that will be Twitter, information or data or posts that are in the public domain on Facebook. So it wouldn't be private posts. They're not in the public domain. Message boards and any other place where data can be harvested. So the first step is to harvest that data, and that process would begin by working in a particular product field and focusing on a number of brands. Now, for a full project, we would normally focus on 12 brands. It can be more, it could be less, but 12 is the recommended number. For some of our smaller, cheaper projects, we might just handle 5 brands, because that might be all that you're interested in for some quick reporting. The next stage is a very important stage, and that's something that in the past we've had to do for you because you had no access to the tools to do that. And this stage is called training the data. Now, what training the data means is that the posts that are being made and the languages that are being processed have to be taught how to process those texts so that they can be codified and produced, and so that dashboards or results, charts, tables can be produced from the data. Now, that process is a little bit of a black box, or was a black box in the past, so that we had to do that all for you. We would look at a series of posts, and then from those posts, using tools that we've got, would actually produce codes to identify whether they were positive or negative sentiments or neutral, pick up the topics and so on, the subtopics that go with that. And indeed, we also were able to handle emotions as well. Now, that tool has been opened up so that you can do all that yourself now if you want to. It's not a quick process. It's not something you'll do in 5 minutes. It's not a particularly difficult process to learn, but it does take time. But it does mean that you can code your topics and subtopics. Now, the way that this is done is by machine language learning. And so what we have is a general purpose model that handles the main languages or many languages. For example, for English, we have a model that can be applied to any product field with a degree of success. But on top of that, you need to train the data to cope with the peculiarities of the particular market that you're working in. So training the data is something you can do yourself with a tool that we can supply, so that we can then apply that into a model that will read the posts and codify them so that you can get meaningful results from your social media projects. So applying the model is the next stage. So having programmed the data that you've trained, that can be applied to the posts that are being harvested, and we can start to then move on to doing analysis. But there's one step in between. You have to monitor the accuracy, because it's no good if the coding that's been done is not accurate enough. You can think of this coding process, for those who are more familiar with quantitative surveys on questionnaires. You can think of this process of where you have an open-ended question where you're coding answers to a closed list. It's a similar process here, except it's not quite the same in the sense that quite often you might have 1 million posts that you're processing, and so you need tools to handle the posts that are coming in to pick up groups of words. And I can show you that in a little demonstration later of how that technique works. So monitoring accuracy is highly important, and you'll find that having trained the data and applied the model, you won't necessarily have the maximum accuracy that's possible. You normally have to go through this process a second time, so that things that are outside that are not getting coded accurately, you would retrain the data, reapply the model, and then you should, if you do this well, you should get something like 85 minimum % accuracy, up to somewhere around the 90% accuracy, and occasionally slightly more than that. And I'll be talking about that a little bit more in a second. Once this model's in place, you can process that data so that it's available to be analysed online using the tools that I'm going to show you towards the end of this presentation, or you can just download the data so that it's available in something like a spreadsheet and other forms that are more useful. And also you can download just tables of figures, rather like crosstabs that you might get. You could show crosstabs by brand, for example, of the content or the topic being discussed, and so on, and whether that's positive or negative. So sort of typical type of crosstabs in Excel format. And then the last thing you might do is to analyze it either using your own tool, so you can just download this data and to plug it into any business information systems you've got, or you can analyze it within the tools that I'm going to show you later on. So analysis, you choose how you want to do that. You might have some tools that can do that, and that's a perfectly acceptable way of working. So that's an overview of the process. You can extend the process. I'm not going to cover this in this webinar today. We've already got enough, I think, to cover in one session. So the process can be extended, and so I'll just give you some examples of how you might extend the process. And I think if this is something you're interested in, I suggest that you contact Charlotte after this event and ask her more questions about this so that we can discuss this in a bit more detail. But the sorts of things I'm thinking of here where you can extend the process is that you might want to merge in other data that you have. So you may have KPIs, sales figures, advertising spend. That data can all be merged in with your social listening data or your social media analytics so that you get a picture of your business or the business all in one place on one chart and see how that ebbs and flows with expenditure on advertising, for example. So that's something that can be done quite easily. Obviously, we would need to know how your data arrives and and then we can obviously decide how we can plug it in. But that's something that we're perfectly familiar with, but we won't be discussing in any great length today. And you can say the same there also about any other survey data you have. You may have some regular quantitative research projects or data that you want to plug in as well. The same will be true of that. That can be plugged into any modelling or analysis that's being collected here. And you can go on and build automated reporting systems off the back of this. All the data is in a convenient form so that you can process it with other systems and report it how you want to. And that can mean going on to developing online dashboards with everything side by side. So I'm going to keep those things out of today's discussions, but they're all things that the data that comes out of a social listening project that we manage would be easily available to plug into these systems, or the reverse, to have these types of data plugged into your social media analytics as well. So that's just broadening the sort of scope, but I'm going to park that from one side for now. So one of the key things for social insight is that accuracy is one of the sort of key things that we like to talk about. It might surprise some people to know that the number of companies that are operating in this space is something like 1,000 companies. So if you're looking for a company and you're new to this that can provide social media analytics, you'll find there's about 1,000 out there, and it's probably increasing by the time that I've actually done this webinar. So it's a very busy market. There is a very, very big difference, though, from those in the market research space and those outside it. So I would say, I'll make up the figure, but something like 990 of those companies are not in the market research field and are doing what I would call fairly basic text analytics. There's plenty of tools out there on the market now, some of which are free, where you can do quick analysis of text. Now that can be okay, but it can give you a very distorted picture if it's not accurate. And what we're about is providing accurate data, and I want to continue with that theme now. And if you're not careful with where you've got millions of records or millions of posts that you want to analyze, because of the volume, it's very easy with the huge volumes going in to just generate fairly meaningless data. And I think some of the tools that we're going to talk about in the next 5 minutes are very relevant to that. Here's an example of where data noise has to be considered. It's very easy when you're harvesting this data to pull in data that's not relevant. And that's because many, many brands have different meanings. So this example here talks about a beer called Poker. You wouldn't want any tweets or posts relating to the game poker. You wouldn't want anybody who talks about having a poker face, because that's totally irrelevant to poker, the beer. So if you were doing a survey on poker beer, you would really must exclude all the irrelevant data. And that applies. Nearly every brand will have something that will pull in the irrelevant data if you're not careful. So for example, Delta Airlines, you would have data about Delta who are in the financial space. If you were doing Beck's beer, there would be David Beckham, who's known as Beck's, who would be in there. And you can get obscurities as well. So you can get obscurities like, I understand there's a Canadian band called Beck's or something like that, or a musician in Canada. That would have to be taken out. Otherwise, that would just distort the data. And below is an example of something that's a real life example that was applied to poker beer, that another automated tool found 16,360 posts that it analysed when working with Poker Beer. When we put it through our model, we actually removed about 6,000 of those because they weren't actually relevant to Poker the beer. So you can tell already that it's easy to get a distortion in your data if you don't do this noise cleaning. And of course, this will also apply to brands where there's multi products available. So Virgin, for example, if you wanted to do some feedback on Virgin Airlines, you would have to exclude all the other Virgin products because they will have different images and different comments about them. So it's important to be really have tools in place that really only identify the data that's relevant to whatever it is that you're trying to report on. And again, this is some real life data that we worked on. So an automated tool, when it looked at positive, neutral, negative sentiments from the posts, it found 39% were positive, 4 were neutral, and 57% were negative. Actually, when we reanalyzed that, we found that of the 39% that were positive, only 88% were actually positive. Less important, perhaps you might say, the 4%, but nonetheless wholly inaccurate. But really, when it came to the negative comments, 57% by this automated tool were coming out as negative. And actually, when we reanalyzed it, it was only 56% of them were truly negative. So it's very easy to get poor quality data. There's some cheap data available, but poor quality data is also available. And getting the accuracy up around that 85–90% mark is really all important. When we're working with these projects, there's 2 levels of service that we offer, and they do come with different quality. So they'll still be better than the what I call the cheap and fast models that were producing the accuracy we had there as 40-odd%. But we do have a general model that we can apply to many languages. So there will be a general model that we have that will understand most English expressions and English that's used that can be used. Now that's obviously produces a lower level of accuracy than one that's written for is enhanced for a particular market, because every market has its own buzzwords, whether that be the financial sector, the beer market, whatever it might be. Every market has its buzzwords, and if you use the general model, although that's much cheaper to use and much quicker to set up and process, you won't get quite the same accuracy you would if we work on a market-specific model. The general model is advanced. I guess it can be used for any project on any subject in the languages that we have available, and a market-specific model can be reused. So if you're working perhaps in the finance sector, you could reuse that model in that language over and over again, or if it was a related subject in that market, you could reuse it and perhaps adapt it without really doing all the work again. So the model is quite important. The accuracy you'll get out of those models is, for the general model, we estimate somewhere in the 65 is probably the low end usually, but up to 80% would be the accuracy level we would expect to achieve, which is obviously still a lot higher than the 44% that one of the cheaper models, off-the-shelf models, produced, where it's just doing text analytics. But we would hit a minimum target of 65, and we would hope to get up to around the 80% mark on most projects. Whereas with a market-specific model, we would think a minimum of 85%, and we would expect to get up to 90% in reality. And indeed, we've hit higher than that. I know a client who wanted to go through I think I went through 100 or 200 tweets individually to check that I actually found the accuracy of 94%, which I think is pretty good. So accuracy is important. One of the things that I think is important, it's not just a claim. There are many companies out there that either don't talk about our accuracy for very good reason, and there's some that make claims about accuracy. It's easy to make a claim, but actually it has to be verifiable. And one thing you'll get as a deliverable on any project that you run with us is that you can go back to the original data to show that the coding or the codification is accurate, it is verifiable. You could go through, if there's 1 million posts out there in the time frame of a particular project you're working on, you could verify all 1 million, but let's say if you verified even 100 or 1,000, you could prove or prove to your client, if you're a research agency, that actually you have got the level of accuracy that we are claiming. So everything that we do is verifiable. It's not just a claim that we're hitting 85, 90%. It really is something you can check out for yourselves. So let's just have a quick talk about training the data, what that entails. It's something you can leave to us. We can do that all for you. We can do that in any language that you might want. If it's a language, obviously, that we can't do ourselves, we would obviously subcontract that to language speakers, just as you would if you were having translations of any other work carried out. So that's something that we would organise for you. But you can do it yourself. There's nothing to stop you. The tool is an interactive tool that lets you view posts, group posts, look for keywords in posts, so that you can do all this work yourself. I will give you a short demonstration of an insight into it in a little while. It's free to use. You will need some training to use it. We recommend probably 3 sessions of about 2 hours. So 2 hours induction, 2 hours probably actually sort of on the project, helping you get started. And then typically people want to come back with queries and questions that take another 1 to 2 hours just to go through how you deal with some practicalities that come up. But we include that free, and we can get you up and running using the tool. But it's not difficult to use particularly. It just takes some familiarity to find out how you work around it. So there's an interactive tool to do the coding, and that coding can do the sentiment to decide whether it's positive, neutral, or negative. It can allow you to pick your topics, and that's one advantage of doing it yourself, actually, that you can decide what the topics are and how they break down into subtopics, which is something that we obviously can do if we handle for you. We can liaise with you, but it may be something that we don't quite get the nuances that are important to you. And if you do it yourself, you can do that. You can obviously decide what those nuances are and how things break into topics and subtopics. And you can also code emotions, which is something very unique to our model, so that we can code to 14 emotions as well. So what I'm going to do now is give you a sort of introduction to the tools. Just clicked on one slide too many. So let me just get on here. And I'm first of all going to show you the tool that lets you explore posts. So if I just log in, and if you see here, when I log into the system here, I've got access to 3 projects. I'm going to just spend a little bit of time on the beer demo first of all. So I'm going to log into that, and this is where you can do your codification. I'm not going to demonstrate the codification process because it's actually quite a detailed thing that you need to learn how to do, and doesn't really come over in a 2 or 3 minute demonstration. But you'll start to understand the sort of ways that you'll work when you're processing the data if I show you how you can look at some data that's already been processed. The tools and the techniques will be quite similar to what I'm about to show you here, and it's just a more detailed process, or when you're doing the codification yourself. So if we look down here, you can see that if I haven't loaded the data yet, sorry, let's load the data. And you can see now that I've got 5 million, or just over 5 million posts here that are available that I can work with on this particular beer project. And at any time when I'm working around this data, I can actually go back to the individual post. So when this data has been coded, it can all be verified and checked very, very easily by yourself, or if you're a research agency, by your client, by going to an individual post and make sure how it's been coded is absolutely accurate. So I can actually just go to the post here, and it will go off with a bit of luck, and there we are. There's the post that somebody called Shiner Beer posted, give mum a gift, she could coordinate with her beer. So I can just go off to that and look at that post, and the same would be true if it was on Twitter. I could link to that post and actually see the exact post that was made. And just as a side line there, actually, we do have a communities platform as well, and I know we have some customers who use this as a way of recruiting people for communities, because you can run a communities platform alongside your social listening platform. I think we're the only company that offer that, and this is obviously a way of recruiting people as well, because again, that data is in the public domain. So we can go back to individual posts at any time we want to. You'll see here that I can hide and show different things about the post. So I could, for example, show, I'm already showing a source type. Actually, I think that'll be just www.facebook.com. I could show the author, I can show the languages, the URLs, I can show the likes, which might be something that's quite interesting, and the shares and so on. And if there's emotions being coded, I can show the emotions. And that data just appears here across as columns. So you can see across here, we've got the content, when it was posted, the location, hasn't been coded actually on this occasion, the brands and the sentiment. So we can work through those things there. And then I can look and do frequency counts on this data. So you can see here, I've got frequencies. So I can click on that, and you can see that the most common frequency for bigrams, that's 2 words, is Bud Light. So I've got 462,000 posts here that are referring to Bud Light. And now if you were coding this project, you would use a similar technique to this, but where you might start is with quadgrams, because that will then tell you what blocks of words are coming up. And you can see that this research was conducted during the 2015 Super Bowl, because that's actually got that quadgram there of 4 words. 2015 Super Bowl commercial comes up 67,000 times, and you'll be able to see here that Coors Light Cold Hard, which I think was an advertising campaign, come up as well a lot of times. So you can quickly start to see what's coming up, and then go down into that and dig into that to find more about your data and code it. You've also got things like word clouds here as well. So I can click on a word cloud. That's been set to bigrams, and you can see that Bud Light is the highest thing coming up. And again, I can switch that to trigrams and unigrams and so on as other ways of representing my data. So this allows you to sort of to delve into the data and explore it. Now, if you want to start to dive sort of deeper into the data, you can start to add rules. Now, you can see here I've got 1 rule already in place. So if I just go into the rules here, you can see I've already got this noise thing here. Just leave that there. I don't recommend changing that, or you'll just get more noise in your data. So I'm going to add a rule now, for example, and say that I'm interested in, let's pick a brand, and I've got a list of the brands here. So let's pick Bud Light, as we were looking at Bud Light just now. And if I search for that and go back to the data set, you can now see that I've dropped down to 800,000 posts, which are about Bud Light. So I've now reduced 5 million down to 800,000. And if I were now to perhaps add another category to this, or another rule to this, I could say that I want to pick people who have got a sentiment that's positive. So I'm now getting the positive sentiments that are coming out of this. And maybe I'm interested in the advertising campaign that went with this. So I'm going to add a rule that looks at a topic. And I can't see topic. There it is, topic. And I want to pick people who are talking about the advertising. So now if I search for that, you can see that I'm just down to 22,000 entries. And you can see I can do some of the things I could go to the individual posts. And of course, I can narrow this down further. I can do frequency counts on this subset of the data now to see what they're talking about, what other topics they're talking about. I can do word clouds and so on. Or I could just copy this data set and export it into some other form so that I can use it in a spreadsheet or whatever else I want to do with it. So you can start to dive down into your data as far down as you want to start exploring it, particularly topics that you're finding of interest. You can do frequency counts to see what might be of interest before you start digging down into your data. And you can use word clouds to give you a very sort of fast picture of what is there in your data. And you can save these as templates if you want to. So I could save this rule, these set of rules here as a template, so that tomorrow I can pick them up and add more rules and look at my data in some other way, or adjust these rules in some way, perhaps then switch it to the negative comments, for example, and research and do frequencies on that and so on. So now I've got negatives. I'm down to just a different set of people and so on. So you can adjust these things and play with your data and explore it. And by using frequencies, you can see what's worth investigating further, and then doing tables, charts, and so on this data. And this tool is the same tool that you would use to actually codify your data. It's a slightly different process from what I'm showing you here, but it'll be the similar sites of techniques that you use to look at your data and explore it so that you can codify it into topics and subtopics and so on. It's just another part, and a little bit more complicated to use, and needs an hour or two's training to get good at. All right, so that's looking at the data in the Data Explorer that we can provide. You'll see down here some other ways of outputting the data. You can see we can get to tables, so you can get conventional tables, detailed crosstabs, so you could analyze some of these things by brand or period and things like that, anything that's on the data. You can export to Tableau. Tableau comes in two forms for those who don't know Tableau. Tableau is a tool for charting and exploring data. I'm going to show you Tableau directly after this, so we'll have a look at it in a minute, but it lets you do tables and charts and explore data. The desktop version of that is free, and the online version I think is about $1,000 per user, so it's reasonably expensive, the online version, but the desktop version is absolutely free. So we could export a subset of this data to Tableau, explore it, and that would all be free. There'll be no cost involved in that because it's a freely usable piece of software on your desktop. And you can output the data to spreadsheets and CSV files to integrate it with other systems, for example, or just to explore it in Excel. All right, so let's come away from that now. I'm now going to look at a couple of projects that are in Tableau, just to give you a feel for what you can do with those. So if we look at a project here on hair care, it'll just take a second to load this up because it's a reasonable sized project. And this is using the desktop tool. I'm not online now. So this will open up for me shortly, and I've now got this project. And we have a similar set of tools that lets me do charts and tables from this data, and with some graphics. You of course can download any of these pictures that you have here into reports that you might want to use in Excel, PowerPoint, and so on. So let's just explore this. So you can see here, if I scroll down, that I've got I think it's about 12 main brands here in the hair care market. This tells me the source of where all those posts have come from. Many have come from Twitter, some have come from boards, and so on. And then down here, I can see the top topics that were mentioned. So there's a product characteristics, promotion, and so on. And here I can see the periods in which they appeared. So there was a leap at that time, and quite a low number in 2015 Q1. But I can then click on this to browse it in more depth, a little bit like I was doing just now. So I can click on this brand here, for example, and having clicked on that, I'm now down to 63,000 posts for that particular brand. And again, you can see there was a peak here for that particular brand, whereas when we had all the brands together, that wasn't the peak, I don't think, but this was the peak for that particular brand. Maybe there's an advertising campaign there. And I can drill down into anything on the data. So I could just look at the Twitter comments or comments on boards by clicking on here. I'm going to pick, let's pick something from down here. I'm going to pick, what should we pick? product characteristics. Pick the biggest category over here, where I've got 30,000 posts. So now if I scroll down, you can see the time of those posts has flattened out a bit here. That quarter still is the highest one, but the others aren't so far behind now. And then I can pick on the subtopics that were coming up. So I could pick up on nourishment. Maybe there was an advertising campaign on the nourishment of the product, and there was no third level drill down there. And I can now click on the posts, and you can see now that I've got the posts, and I can click on any of those to go back to the individual posts, rather like I did before. So that was on a ball, that was on Twitter. There is no share count on this. I think the other dashboard I'm going to show you does actually show the number of times it was shared by other people. And I can show as many posts as I like here. I can show 5, I can show 50, I can show 100, and I can obviously download those. And I can look at those posts in more detail, or I can look at them in some sort of chart form over here, and drill down into them here. So I can get those posts in chart form, change the chart type, look at the topics and so on, and again download that information and put it into reports if that's relevant. And I've got another little dashboard here I'm going to show you very quickly. We have one on beer. This is again using the Tableau desktop reader. And similar sort of principle here. So if we go into the data here, this has been prepared slightly differently, with the brands across the top, the number of posts here, whether they're positive, negative, and so on being coded here, the source of them down here. So same sort of principles, slightly different layout. So we could stick with Bud Light as I did earlier. Here's Bud Light. I might want to focus on the positive posts, and I can see now where the positive posts are coming from, and I might want to look at the people who actually talked about the beer. And again here now I can view those posts, and for this particular project the number of shares have been actually coded on this one. So we can see the most shared post was this one here with 90 shares, and so that was obviously an influencer, you might say, because that was shared 90 times, that particular post, this 183. And we can see all the hashtags that are appearing from this particular data set. So these are sort of some of the tools that you can use to explore the data yourself, and get some more meaning and look at what it is that's important to you in your project. So there's 4 considerations when it comes to the packages that we offer. You can use the general model, which be applied to a language as a whole. So with model for English, a model for German, and so on. And that will be obviously cheaper than building a customized model that deals with your particular market. Now, as you may recall, the accuracy would be 65 to 80% for the general model, whereas it would be 85 to 90, 95 even for the customized model. But of course, these come at 2 price bands, which can give you an opportunity to do something on a smaller budget. We can prepare the whole project for you and handle the preparation for you, doing the codification, or you can prepare it yourself. We can provide the tool, train you how to do it, and you can do all the training of the data yourself. You can have a one-off report, or you can have regular reporting. So you could, if for a one-off report, that would just be one set of data, either perhaps 3 months in the past or 6 months in the past, or perhaps over the next 3 months. Or we can provide regular reporting for you on a quarterly, 6 monthly, monthly, weekly, whatever period you want. If you're doing weekly, it would probably become only cost effective to feed that into automatically into an online dashboard, which would add some extra costs to it. Keep downloading the data every week becomes quite a tedious process, and you're probably better, if you really want to make that level of use, to have it as an online dashboard and pay the Tableau fee for having it available online, because then it can be an automatic feed. But we can we can work to whatever period you think's appropriate. Quarterly is probably the most common recommended one. And we can report it, or you can report it. So we can just give you the data so that you can work with it in the way that I've shown you today, where you browse it, build rules, or drill down into it. Or we can actually treat it like a full market research project and write a report on it and give a presentation on it if you wish as well. So there's sort of 2 by 2 by 2 options there, which means there's sort of 16 options before you start just picking off the different ways that you can work. And that has quite significant cost implications, just as some guideline, and I don't want these to be sort of figures that you should have cast in stone, but just as a sort of guideline. For example, a project where we do all the work and we code topics, subtopics, sentiment, emotions, perhaps give you a 6-monthly report for a year, or two reports in a year. That's going to be up around the 28 to 30,000 US dollars, 20,000, 22,000 UK pounds sort of area. But you can do, if you were to do a project where you do all the codification yourself, you do the coding of the topics and the sentiment yourself, you would be looking, and you perhaps have 3 months data, you'll be looking at somewhere perhaps just under 10,000 US dollars, £7,500. So a significant difference if you do something like that. And that can come down even further if you cut down to maybe perhaps 5 brands using the general model. You might be down to 5,000 to 6,000 US dollars, £4,000 to £5,000, £4,000 to £4,500. So that would be using the general model, slightly less accuracy, and perhaps only 5 brands, but that might be giving you what you want for your particular analysis and research needs. So there's an overview of what I wanted to cover in this webinar today. What we've really covered here is just the general process of how a project works, with some idea of how we would work with you or how you can work with it yourself, issues of quality, and then just an introduction as to how you can use some of the tools that allow you to dive into that data and get reports and so on from it. Now, we've got sort of 10 minutes or so for questions. I don't know if Charlotte's got any questions coming in, but at that point I'll stop and I'll hand back to her to see whether there's any questions that have been coming in while I've been talking for the last 40 or so minutes.
Hiya. Yeah, we have got some questions coming already, but feel free to keep typing them in. That's not a problem. I've got a few I can take. So the first one we've got here is, can you give some indication of how long it takes to train the data?
Okay, well, it's not a quick task. Learning it, as I said already, probably takes you 3 sessions of 2 hours. So that's a sort of day's work just to learn it, how to do it. It's not particularly difficult. It's just finding your way around rather than actually being desperately challenging to use. In terms of actually doing the work then to actually codify your data, you're probably talking about 2 weeks, 2-man weeks to do that on a typical project, depending on how varied the data is you're receiving. It might be slightly more or slightly less than that, depending on how varied the topics that come up and so on, and of course how many brands you're interested in. That would be for about 12 brands. If you're in a market where there was only perhaps 4 players, that would reduce the work as well for you. So I would allow certainly 1 week and perhaps up to 2 or slightly over 2 weeks. It'd be the sort of range.
Okay, thank you. We've got another one here. Can you get the same data quality in every single language? Yes, it's a good question. One of the things that I think people often raise with us is, can you handle languages that are more complex than others? I think that's probably how I'm interpreting that question that's been asked there. And the answer is yes, we've had very good results. So there are languages. I'm not an expert in every language in the world, that's for sure. I can order a beer in a lot of languages, but that's about all. German's a language that people often question, because German words tend to be made up, or often are made up of 3 or 4 words put together.
And I think some of the languages like Tagalog in the Philippines, I think Bahasa, some of those often put words together. We can handle all that. We've had very good results on that. And so, yes, we do have the models in place that can deal with words when they're put together, which tends to be the most complicated type of words. Words with a lot of slang also can be handled as well. English has a lot of strange ways of wording things which are not always obvious. That's all been programmed in. So yes, we've had equal success, I think, in every language. And if anybody has concerns about a particular language, I don't know whether a language was referred to in that post or that question, Charlotte, but if someone's got any concerns about a particular language, we'll be pleased to discuss it with them.
Okay, thank you. Got a couple more coming in here. How are emotions coded, and how can you code emotions to every post? Some must be neutral.
Okay, we have a model for coding to 14 different emotions, and the tool will help you do all of that. So coding emotions is something that we've done. The straight answer to the question there is no, you can't code every emotion that every post that comes up, because many will be neutral. It does vary product field to product field, and dare I say, the more emotive a topic is, the higher level of emotions that you can code. So something where it's quite emotive, you might get as high as 60, 70, 80%. Something that's a more mundane business where there is little emotion, it's much more factual, the content, would possibly be as low as 20, but 50% is an average where of the posts that you get, 50% you can't actually apply an emotion because it's more of a statement. I don't know, perhaps the salesperson didn't call me back or something like that, and you might say that's frustration, perhaps, that particular one. But some things are just factual, and you can't really code an emotion to them, and shouldn't try to. But you're right, about 50% is the average. But on some product fields, it might creep up to as high as 70, 80. But again, if you've got 500,000 posts and you're still getting an emotion from 20%, that's still 100,000 posts that are being coded. So, it's useful data. I hope that answers the question anyway. Okay,
thank you. Got another one here. So you've talked a lot about the accuracy. Why can't we get 100% accuracy?
Okay. Okay, good question. Well, I could answer that in a trite way and say you just can't. I'd also say, and I'm not trying to deflect here, is that no research project is 100% accurate, in my opinion, or it's unlikely it's going to be 100% accurate, because there's always noise in data of any sort, whether it be an interviewer miscoding something, someone giving an answer they didn't mean, or whatever it might. So 100% accuracy is a bit of a myth, I think, but let's not go into the philosophy of that. What you'll find is that when you code this data, you get a curve, and as you code more posts, you find the accuracy goes up from 80 to 85, and then when you do your final iteration of testing the model, you normally can get it to 90, sometimes slightly in excess of that, sometimes not much more than 85, and it will level off. And I would argue it would be the same if you were coding open-ended questions on a questionnaire with 1,000 people in the sample, that you get a tail off at some point where the answers don't really quite fit anything. And so actually I think 90% or 85% is very good data, and data you can trust. What I don't trust is the some of the sort of almost free cheap tools that are available, where the accuracy, I've found accuracy of sort of 30%, which, unless you really are just trying to get some very quick idea of what's going on and you treat it as rough and ready, really isn't very useful. So yes, why can't you read it 100%? I haven't really answered that question. I think the answer is you can't. But I challenge that for any piece of research almost. It's just more provable here. But I think the thing that's important, and I did say this during the presentation, is you can verify it. You can take a sample of 1,000 posts, or your client can, They can check back about how the systems automatically coded the text for you using the model that's been set up. And you can check that, the client can check to see whether they're satisfied. It's 90%, it's actually still hitting that 90 or 85% accuracy that we're targeting. So I think, the fact that it's verifiable, I wouldn't say is good enough, but it is actually quite compelling evidence that what you're doing is good work.
Okay, so we're still on accuracy here. So how do you monitor accuracy on an ongoing basis? Can the quality drop?
That's actually a very good question. It's sort of supplemental to the one, and perhaps I should have covered it off myself with the last question. It's a good point that it is possible. Yes, you should monitor accuracy. If you're running a tracking study over 1 or 2 years, you should be doing samples to check that accuracy is being maintained and it's not suddenly dropping off. It is possible that something can come into the public domain that would bring noise into the data. I can't think of a great example, but say somebody brings out a product in a country that you wouldn't necessarily know about, that is or just in a market you don't know much about, that has the same name as your particular product you're interested in, or one of the brands you're interested in, that could produce some noise. So we talked about how Beck's beer would have to exclude anything to do with David Beckham being Beck's as well. If there was another Beck's that got into another market that you didn't know about, something perhaps, I don't know, a type of kite or something you have no idea about because you don't follow that market, you would need to pick that up and remove that from the data. So yes, it is an ongoing process. It isn't something that you just build and forget about. I don't think it needs monitoring every week or anything like that, but it's something you should be keeping an eye on, certainly, to make sure that you're not reducing the quality over time. So I think it's a good point that whoever made that point.
Okay, I don't think there's any more coming in at the moment, but of course, if any more are thought of after this, I'll be happy to, if you email them over to me, I'd be happy to answer them for you after. I think that's it for now, Phil, on question front.
Okay, well, we're closed there. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for attending. It's been useful to you, and I'll say thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.